Good evening and welcome to DLP TV. Maxine McClean here with you this evening. I'm pleased again to continue our examination of the ministries of government. As you would recall, during the escalated debate, the leader of the opposition and leader of the Democratic Labour Party was able to provide us with some serious analysis of several of the ministries. It gave them an opportunity to examine them, and we consider it very important that we continue this discussion. And this evening, with me to do so are on my right, the General Secretary of the Democratic Labour Party, Mr. Pedro Shepherd, and on my left, Ensley Grainger, Attorney at Law, and I trust soon to be Member of Parliament. And joining us in a short while will be President Senator Andre Worrell. As you can imagine, the Ministry of Transport and Works is one which is mandated to undertake a number of critical functions. And in the 2025-2026 estimates, the ministry would have been allocated $111,466,450. That is a significant sum, and of course, when we look at the various areas that fall under the ministry, one has to ask ourselves, have we been able to realize the kinds of activities and expenditures as we would want to see our taxpayers' funds being properly utilized, or are these funds being wasted? Are we seeing promises met and accomplished, or wasted as I tried? And one way in which I found it useful to describe how I envisage what is happening, or when I step back and I look at what is happening, I have to ask myself, is the Ministry of Transport and Works a runaway bus or a slow boat? And of course, as I said, I have an interesting team of gentlemen with me this evening, and we will explore that. I would want to start with General Secretary Pedro Shepherd, who is spokesperson for the party, the spokesman on this ministry, and I would want him to share with me his thoughts on what, from your observation and obviously from examining what is the official areas identified, from your perspective, what do you see to be the role of the ministry in terms of what are the key functions, and what are your initial thoughts about what you've been observing in relation to the ministry?
Thank you, Maxine, and good evening to my fellow panelists. Good evening to Barbados and Nelson and the diaspora. I am the Shadow Minister of the Facebook person. I've been assigned the portfolio to the Minister of Public Works and Transport. Sometime in 2024, that portfolio was assigned to me. It is not an area that people might want us to deal with, because I was in education before, but education that this new portfolio gives you the opportunity to learn what you might say. And I am obviously one of those persons in my life who would have to interact or come in contact with the Minister of Local Transport as a user of the public roads like London. And any one of us, as Maxine said, we're trying to establish whether this is a moving ministry, or a dead ministry, or a slow ministry. And as we look across Barbados, we might be seeing some road works, but the ministry takes on a much wider scope than that. It's actually a Ministry of Transport and Works by name. In researching this ministry, came across the strategic goals of the ministry, which are as follows, and I will try to go through them so that the public understand the scope of this ministry, and will not put it down to simply a ministry responsible for roads and the drainage of this country. So the strategic goals of this ministry are as follows. One, to provide sound planning policy advice, as well as technical services in the area of transport, roadworks, mechanical and electrical services, and drainage maintenance. 2, to provide a well-regulated and competitive environment for the land transport industry. 3, to provide an excellent and safe, technology-driven, modern and efficient public transportation system. 4, to maintain and rehabilitate highways, tenantry, and residential public infrastructure. 5, to provide safety on all work-related roads, public transport, and electrical systems management. 6, to provide effective flood alleviation and mitigation solutions across Barbados. 7, build and strengthen human capacity and skills, as well as institutional capacity with the transport sector. A number of areas, therefore, fall under the Ministry of Transport and Works. The mission of the ministry is to achieve efficiency and effectiveness while safeguarding the public's interest in the goals to provide efficient road networks, the proper maintenance of vehicles, certain electrical services, and public transportation. As a matter of fact, we in Barbados might not necessarily see this ministry as providing most of the services as mentioned. The electrical engineering department, for example, falls under this ministry. That is the department responsible for electrical installations, for street lighting, for street lights, and so on. So the ministry has a fairly wide scope. As we drive across Barbados, though, our complaint is really the condition of our roads. So we tend to think that the ministry is simply responsible for roads. And of course, coming with roads, we get drainage and so on. But it's a fairly wide ranging ministry. And it has a budget of 134 million actually for this year. I think the 111 is the non-statutory budget. It has a fairly big budget. It has the Deputy Prime Minister responsible for it, so we know that it has to be a ministry of importance. It also has under its portfolio the licensing authority. It regulates all the licensing of vehicles, the weighing of vehicles, and so on. The Barbados Transport Authority, which was enacted, the legislation for that, it was enacted in 2007. That is also part of the Ministry of Transport and Works. So all the vehicles on the road, basically, from bicycles or even tricycles, back up to the larger heavy-duty vehicles, that particular ministry in terms of regulating, licensing, the ZRs, the taxis, the minibuses. So it's a relatively big ministry with lots of activities going.
Thank you very much. I think that you've done an excellent job in presenting to our audience and to us here on the panel the wide range that constitutes the Ministry of Transport and Works. And in a sense, what we have is a ministry that is pretty quote unquote visible in terms of the activities it has to undertake. It's a ministry that also impacts on all of us on an ongoing basis. And so perhaps what I will do now is to ask you, Ensley, given the stated strategic goals that you would have heard highlighted, from your perspective, how do you assess the ministry's performance? And you can highlight whatever areas you may want to, but against these strategic goals, how is this ministry doing?
Good night to you, Maxine. Good night to you. And good night to you in the viewing public, Barbados and the diaspora. And let me say, we give a public happy birthday. Welcome to Shepherd. After to attend Right. As we look at the goals as stated by Andre Shepherd in his strategic goals, you come back to the question, is it a runaway bus or Super Bowl? I looked at the manifesto of the Barbados Labour Party for 2018. And under the rubric repairing of roads, this is what the manifesto is saying. It is more than an inconvenience when plus-size potholes outnumber roads, when walking or driving put people at risk, and when roads collapse, road repairs will be done. I am sure that if the Ministry of Transport and Work, or the government for that matter, had to use a mirror, they would see themselves reflected in this 2018 statement that they made in relation to roads. We are still faced today with plus-size potholes and even more than plus-size potholes in our roads today. So the question is, are we better off in terms of our road maintenance in 2025 than we were in 2018? If in 2018 the government, the opposition at the time, they were seeing that plus-size potholes were this inconvenience, and it was a priority in their manifesto. Where are we today? We are no better off in 2025 than we were in 2018. And given the fact that in 2018, between that 2008 and 2018 period, the government of the day was under strict financial management, so to speak, having been under the worst recession that you were, I would say, had to encounter. So I'm saying that this ministry, I think it has failed the people of Barbados. And if we look, as we travel around, we will really ask ourselves, where is the money allocated to this ministry? Where is it being spent? How is it being spent? Clearly, from the estimates debate, and hearing Minister Strawn, you would know that it is not being spent as he would expect it to be. When he asked the minister, you know, how many more must die on Lord Road? And no sooner than he can say that somebody lost their life. So in a nutshell, I think this ministry has failed miserably.
Thanks very much, Ensley. And Andre, you as the senator would have sat through the estimates debate, and you would have engaged in debate around the numbers, so to speak. And I would pose the question that Ensley just posed: where is the allocated money being spent? How has it been spent? What would be your initial responses to that?
All right, thank you, Maxine, and good evening to all of the viewers on DLP TV. Well, in terms of looking at the Ministry of Transport and Works, one of the things that I found from going through the estimates document and the allocation of funding, I was surprised at the amount of money which was allocated to the ministry for this year, and then when you compare it to the increase which certain heads in the ministry would have received. So when I looked at it, there was one particular instance, and I will go into detail a little bit later, where one particular head spent $267,000 in the previous year, but miraculously it was allocated over $8 million for a current year. So one of the things I find with the Ministry of Transport and Works is that it is one of those ministries where you don't really have a system in which you can actually grade its performance. Because every year, especially during the estimates debates, MPs like to get up and boast, well, this road was done, or complain about getting roads done. And you always hear the ministry coming up with road projects and money being allocated for road projects. But yet, so we as a country cannot seem to understand, one, how do they prioritize the roads which need to be repaired? Because you would have seen a good classic example in terms of getting the roads done around Kensington for World Cup cricket. But yet, so people in St. Joseph and St. John and St. George still have to go through craters, not even potholes, but craters, right, on craters on a daily basis. And you even heard the MP for St. George North mention that when she spoke about the stretch of road from Lower Estate to Sweet Bottom or Sweet Vale, which has not been done for years and needed being repaired. So one of the things that I looked at in terms of the allocations for the ministry, it was allocated over $137 million in this current estimate. Now, I will just take time to go through a few of the heads. Program 510, which is Road Network Services, and the sub-program 495, which is Tenantry Roads. And you will hear this in a number of rural districts in terms of getting tenantry roads done. Now, there was a huge jump in asset under construction in that ministry from $1.2 million in 2024-2025 to $5.7 million for this current year, 2025 to 2026. So that is the particular ministry which was only able to spend $224,000 in 2023 to 2024. So when you look at that, if a certain department was only able to spend $224,000 in a year, but all of a sudden is getting $5.7 million, is it realistic that that department will be able to spend that money? And what metric do we use to determine if the money was actually spent after this financial year? When we come back to doing the estimates again in March next year, what estimate would be metric would we actually use to determine that that $5.7 million was actually spent in repairing roads? Because you don't get any statistics in terms of, okay, over the last year we were able to pave 20 kilometers of road. Of that 20 kilometers, 5 was on the highways, another 5 was in rural constituencies or on secondary roads, and another 10 kilometers was in tenantry roads. And by now, the ministry should be in a position to give you that information when we come to doing things like the estimates. And that is one of the reasons why I say that this particular ministry is one of the ministries which deserves a special audit by the Auditor General, because when you look at these numbers, $5 million, especially in a year leading up to an election, what you can think of, one, they may either now be spending the money to do the roads to either win votes by saying, oh, at least we paid the roads for you, and then the person can ask, oh, wait, couldn't have done it a long time before. Or two, you may know that a lot of these roads are done through contractors. What is the relationship between these contractors and some of the same MPs and the ministers who will be allocating this work to the contractors? So you have to look at all of these things. And it is not only within that particular head. When you come to 5.11, highway construction and maintenance, this one in particular, was particularly interesting because when I look at the allocation of funds compared to the statutory personal emoluments, I realized a big shift. Normally, there would be like a 2-to-1 ratio between the assets under construction and the funds allocated for personal emoluments, persons who will be being paid. So in 2023 to 2024, the assets under construction was 27 million. The personal emoluments was 12 million. Okay, fine. Then when you look at the revised estimates for 2024 to 2025, assets under construction, 14 million. The statutory personal emoluments, 10 million. So fewer people did the work. But then now you come to this election year, 2025 to 2026. Personal emoluments, 14 million. Assets under construction, 13 million. So you're hiring more people than the work in which you are doing. And these are things that we need to be concerned about. Not that we have an issue with persons getting the job, but I remember when the Democratic Labour Party was in office and they talked about us being reckless and careless with our fiscal performance in terms of hiring more people than we need. And now you can see glaring examples within the Ministry of Transport and Works, and we all know what that ministry is good for. When you pass a road that is dug up and you see the person there next to the road, and you pass it for an entire year and you come back and not a stroke or nothing has been done with the road. So these are the things that we need to pay close attention to in the estimates process and how this government is spending our money.
Thank you very much, Andre, and I'm happy that you were able to highlight some of those numbers. And what I'm going to do now is take a couple of minutes to put some names to some projects and programs that they have, because I took some time to look at the website of the ministry, and you've shared some numbers there, but we also know that we've heard discussions about a number of projects. Now, the average citizen does not necessarily know how these things connect, and so therefore I'm going to put some questions out there. And I'll stick with roads for the minute. You would have heard Barbadians about something called the CAF project, and that is really a project of 50 billion US dollars. I mean, yes, US dollars, or 100 million Barbados dollars. And it was funded by the Bank of Latin America. I wouldn't bother to give you the Spanish name, but that's where it's CAF, where it gets the initials CAF from. And it's a loan under a project called the Sector-Wide Approach Program to support the land transportation sector. This project, actually, this loan agreement would have been signed in 2017, and the phase one of the project commenced in January 2018. Now, we need to know what is really happening with this project, because under the project, they say that they're phase 3. Now, what does phase 3 constitute? And it would be nice for the ministry to keep us, frequently updated. And so it's talking about roads which, under the project priorities given to long connecting roads with heavy traffic volume and residential access. Key segments of the primary road network, drainage, sidewalks, bridges, culverts, etc., being rehabilitated. And so the question is, when I recall what you were saying, Ensley, about let's say I'm not going to bite my tongue, the plus size pothole. The question is, where are we with this project, and how is it being rolled out, and not pun intended on the, or pun intended with the reference to rolled out, because that's important. Then there's another project where they're supposed to be introducing or have introduced something called the roller compacted concrete program, the RCC program. And according to the website, and I quote from the website, the ministry has embarked on a program using the new technology of roller compacted concrete. I don't know if anybody has seen what that looks like. I can't remember. So they probably can tell us where it is rolled out. This is a process by which roads are paved using concrete and applied with equipment designed for that purpose. So I am hoping to see some of this equipment on the road. And they say that roads paved in that way are expected to last in excess of 40 years. So let's hope that, because what we're hearing is right now, I quote that, but I want to come to something else because it mentioned, and I like to read from these things, it mentioned in the earlier one, talking about main roads, but if you take your mind back a couple of years, I was born on Highway 1 in Blackburn. And if you remember, we had some long delays for a while when they did some rehabilitation right down to Old Town and beyond. And it took forever. But if you take a drive down there now, you'll find yourself doing a bump, but you probably go north, so you would know, the potholes are back and the manholes are not stable, they're sinking. And there's a reason for that. And I took some time to ask the people who know about roads. And I will tell you what I was told in terms of that there's been a shift in how we do things. One of the important things in road construction is quality assurance. You need to test the asphalt, okay? And I was probably a reliably informed or professionally informed by a professional that the work was formerly done by the NSI, Province National Standards Institute. But no, you know what? I am told, and the ministry can refute this if this is the case, that the current testing is done by the supplier. So if I am making the material or supplying the material, where's the independence in terms of testing? So because if I have a contract, I don't want to come and say, ladies and gentlemen, I messed up. The quality of the asphalt is not what it should be. So in asking further, I was told that the equipment at the NSI needs to be replaced. You're talking $130-something million. And you made reference to some significant increasing in some numbers there from 200 and something thousand to, which really the question you were asking is, are they going to have the capacity, in other words, to deliver on that? But I'm simply saying that it's a critical part of ensuring that our roads are going to stand up, and there has to be testing, and the normal best practice is that you have an independent entity tested, in this case, a government agency. Why is BNSI not given the resources to get the necessary equipment? So they don't have the capacity. And so my concern, that's when they talk about, we talk about a runaway bus or slow book, because it makes you do two things. You're slow to provide the equipment, but you're fast to pay a consultant. And accept from that consultant's testing that his work is which is crazy. We hear about issues of compaction and so on. So that's one of the concerns that I have, and I think.
And then there is the question too.
Go ahead.
There is the question too of how can the government then challenge these contracts in terms of getting the same construction firms to actually go and redo roads that in their opinion have not been done up to standard.
And the question is, if the contractor says, I did the test, my road is good, how do you then challenge? I don't know if Pedro, you want to jump in here and then talk to Ensley on any of these matters related to the roads, if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah, my position on roads, yes, is that I see three problems with our roads. Poor construction, inadequate drainage, and the increase of vehicles using our roads, particularly those heavy-duty vehicles, the large cane trucks and those pulling containers and so on. And I therefore have to ask the question then, is there a standard thickness? You were just speaking about the quality of the asphalt, but I'm also going to look at whether or not there is a standard thickness. I guess the quality would come in as well, because if the quality is good, quality is bad. I think we need to look at the quality of the asphalt, the thickness of the asphalt that is being used. Very often we hear that the concrete roads are stronger, but they're also harder on the vehicles. So I believe they try to use less concrete. You will mention the compacting of the concrete, the roads and so on. I saw a video from the ministry on the ministry website. A few roads being done across Barbados. But again, as they said the road, those concrete roads are more expensive. They will last 3 times as long as thick, they said. Because you said 40 years, whereas they get 15 to 20 of the normal asphalt roads. Recently, we would have heard about the accelerated mill and pave, and that is fine because you get a nice smooth road for 2 or 3 months, and then those roads fall back into disrepair again. You will notice utility companies coming after the roads were milled and paved and cutting the roads. You will also notice, as I said earlier, poor drainage, so you will start to see pockets of the road cracking, and then you get some depression more to the side of the road, the left side of the road. And once that starts trending, it goes back into the original state, where you have these large potholes. Some people tend to call them craters rather than potholes. So those are some of the things that we have to look at. And when we go back to the budget and the estimates and so on, I think some of the numbers are hidden as well. Because we heard last year that there was this accelerated program, 25 kilometers of road, $33 million and so on. I don't think that is reflected in the estimates for this year, which was, I think, 66 million allocated. So are the estimates showing the road over? I don't think the estimates are showing the road over. And I think on careful examination, one would have to see clarity with some of these things. We question the transparency in some of these ministries in terms of the expenditure and so on. The excuse given for some of these roads, and the fact that they're doing so many roads, they need to do all roads, because the excuse being given is climate change, and climate change affects the entire country. A few weeks ago, I had reason to travel to Leicester Bourne School. I'm going through kindergarten. I met someone that I worked with, and we were discussing the roads because people try to avoid kindergarten. I saw the gentleman today, and he told me, "You're passing kindergarten, like it meant something because he's now getting road milled and paved." So I think that as we go across the country, there's still a lot of roads being milled and paved, but the quality of these roads is really my concern. And the amount of money being spent is also a concern, because if you're going to spend those large sums, then one would expect that the next 15 years or so, incoming governments will not have the problem of repaving these same roads again. But they're going to do it every time the government takes over, and it makes more sense, really. I also believe that we can break down a lot of these roads, particularly those that go into communities. Give some workers in the communities, people in the community, some of this work. Right now, we are seeing work basically in the hands of 2 large construction companies, and they believe that, and they're not going to be, employment not going to increase. So when we see this massive road works program, we don't think that it's going to increase the number of people working as well, because a lot of it is done by machinery. Whether or not employment is created for the night shift, one will have to examine that. But I think that the Ministry of Transport and Works really need to explain to the public of Barbados the projects that they're doing, the length of the lifespan of these projects, and whether or not it's very economical for some of these projects. Because in some cases, we believe that maybe they can construct new roads as opposed to trying to mill and pave something new, because it's really an inconvenience, causing traffic congestion and so on. I find the mill road fast. In the night they can mill, but then to pave, it takes another 3-4 weeks, sometimes months. Serious inconvenience, you know.
But actually, before I go to Ensley, I didn't get the name of the road, but on the radio, because I have a radio going in my house audio, and they were referring to some road that was initially to be milled and paved, but now they realized that it was soil that needed, so they now have to go back and excavate and pretty much rebuild that road. And I would just make reference to one road, because in doing my research, somebody reminded me that highway to where which would have been done, quite some time ago, that cracks and so on only appeared after 10 to 15 years, which means that there was some way in which they were doing it. Before we move on to look at some other things, are there any comments you have about the roads, any concerns that you have in?
That's what I some things that you said, and also Pedro, in terms of the standards as it relates to the mill and pay. Are we just looking at mass production and sidestepping the integrity of the road? What are we doing pre-paving? Are we still maintaining that structure, the integrity of the road can withstand of times after it has been paved? And just recently, there was a fire in Nelson Street, the last fire in Nelson Street. And we had the station officer of the Barbados Fire Service, and he lamented the fact that a hydrant was paved and they were unable to access that. So we had a road milled and paved that has now to be redubbed to expose that hydrant for the fire service. Now, one could imagine if it was a situation where a life or lives were impacted and the fire officers are unable to access the hydrant, what a catastrophe we would have. So I think that in terms of this mill and paving ministry, the pavers, as it were, they need to be in consultation with the utility companies, with the fire service, and those to ensure that what happened in Nelson Street would not happen in any other area. So there must be collaboration between the utilities, between the contractors, and also the fire.
So the same thing happened on the stretch going up quickly. Presidents cover the city.
No, that is a major problem. One of the major, Andre, one of the major road projects was the Scotland District Road Rehabilitation Project. And from what I understand, this was a project funded by the Chinese to the tune of about $230 million. I have some comments, but before I comment, what are your thoughts about that? What feedback would you have heard or from your investigations? Is there anything that you want to say before I share some thoughts that I have on that?
Well, on that project, what I've heard so far is that one, the project seems to have gone over the time which was allocated, and they seem to have encountered a number of issues. Now, realistically, this is a project that many Barbadians will not get to see happening because those are not roads and that Barbadians traverse. But no, obviously the Democratic Labour Party does not have any issues with government borrowing money from the Chinese, and part of the allocation of that funding, because it normally comes at a very low interest rate, is for the Chinese to send over their laborers. But I think that we would have to make some provision where we have persons with technical knowledge, that any labor that you bring in from China should work along with those persons with technical knowledge. And to some extent, I have understood that that has not been happening. You have the strong conservation unit in the Scotland District, which for years have been responsible for building the gables and actually building the structures to maintain that area. The geology of the Scotland District will not be the same as the geology of China. And so obviously this is where you need your technical and your local experts giving guidance to you. So my understanding, a number of those roads were built, structures were in place, and they were not done according to the standard that we would have done if someone from the Scotland District had done the roads. And the roads had to be, they gave way, and they had to be, they had to go back in and they build those same roads again. So that adds to the expense and the length of time it's taken for those projects to get off the ground. And these are things that are not really in the face of many people in Barbados, but by now the persons in the Scotland district who have been suffering, living under those construction, you heard them complaining about it, that roads have been cut off for a number, not even months, but years under this same project, and the roads have not yet been done, so it's an inconvenience. It affects the bus routes, the children getting to school, and persons getting out, and then you also have a situation with bridges, because the Scotland district is a very peculiar area. If a bridge is down in one section, it means that you have to travel miles in order to get out, and especially when it comes to the rainy season, the hurricane season. You can have the persons certain districts being cut off. So from what I know, the project is not being properly managed, and there are issues in terms of the construction. I also want, before you go on, the previous conversation about the mill and paved roads. When you're building a road, you have to take into consideration drainage.
Yeah.
Before our roads were built in terms of a slant, where the peak of the road was in the middle, in the center, and the water graded off to the sides to allow the water to find its way to the drain. So if you mill and pave and you leave completely flat roads, when the rain falls, you're going to have all of the water sheeting down the road, and then that in itself is going to heat up the road as well and increase flooding. So all of these are things that we have to look at. I want to put on a record. The first road that they did was the highway from Warren, the gas station in Warren's going up towards UE. If you travel on that road, it's not a plus size pothole, it's a plus size wormhole that they have there right now. Wormhole, Star Trek. It will probably take you to China.
No, my concern with this, because in looking at the issue of roads and funding of roads, because that's one of the issues that we have to look at. Where you mentioned and we would have negotiated loans as a form of government with the Chinese, their concessional loans. But you also negotiate the terms and conditions of those loans. And one of those has to do with labor, because I can tell you that when Sam Lawrence was being constructed, there were negotiations about the ratio of local and Chinese labor, etc. So that is something that you can negotiate. I have another concern though, because in borrowing the sum of money, 230 million Barbados dollars, my question is, and again, we put these questions to government so we can understand, because I look at it from the perspective of some of the discussions that I would have had in as a former minister. Are you comfortable, is this money, or is this loan negotiated? Are you getting a lump sum of money up front, largely accessing these loans? And the question the reason why I raise that is, do you have the capacity to efficiently and effectively execute the project in a way that you do not find yourself being committed to service loans or to pay commitment fees and those kinds of things? Because at the end of the day, this project has been lagging, and this project has been lagging, and that is my concern. So if you have all of these projects bunching or major projects, and you get all of these resources up front, or however you do them, and you're not completing the project, these are additional costs. Where is the efficiency of the whole exercise? So I think that is something. So in looking at all of these issues of the road, there's another issue I want to touch that is related, and that is the use of the vehicles on the road, the licensing of vehicles on. And I will ask a question: which of you perhaps knows anything about this? What was planned? It's the vehicle registration system, which was titled Electronic Vehicle Registration. The EVR, this one, and you might remember there were some structures. I've seen one along Waterford, there's one on Highway 2A and so on. And even the license, the registration, the whole issue of how licensing authority interfaces. Well, maybe I should share what I've dug up. Let me put it that way. And I asked the question because someone suggested to me that it is scandalous that a contract was awarded to a company. And I don't know, I'm not sure because I've seen the name out in the public domain, but I will ask the question. Has the government awarded a contract to a company in Barbados that started out in 2000 as a small private company invested in commercial properties? Okay, and from what I understand, back in 2020, more than 5 years ago, because it was signed from what I was told on the 20th of March, and I'm looking down at my paper so I get my figures correct. That on the 20th of March 2020, a contract was signed with this company for $5,805,596 for this electronic vehicle registration. And then it went from 5,805,000, I will round it to 6. It went to 8,888,769, so I will round that to 9. So it went from 6 to 9. That's 50% increase. A third of 6 is 3. I mean, a half of 6 is 3. 3 and 6 is 9. And then I'm told that the total amount paid up was $10,585,154.74. So you had an overrun of nearly $2 million. Now, what I was told was that the contract was terminated on the 24th of August, 2024. I'm not a lawyer, but my friend here can tell me when I hear terminated, it didn't say it was complete, the project was completed. It seems as though somebody said, look, move around me. You know, this isn't working. I am going to look into the contract and end it. So my question to the government is, where are we with this project? And the question is, were they sold a bag of goods, old technology, or something? Tell us about it, because that's a lot of money. What were they paying for, and what did we get? And where are we with this whole registration? I mean, we had these stickers and whatever, and then it went back to this
Nothing.
to nothing. And
No, they tell you.
go ahead, Andre.
Right now, I think that aspect of the ministry is in total confusion. And I don't know if many Barbadians pay any attention, because I think that Barbadians have adopted the position. As long as I put gas in my car, it means I am paying very little tax. And because there were so many different iterations of how you will maintain registration for your vehicle. You were first told that once you pay your insurance, the car insurance, that the insurance company will do that. Now, all of a sudden, you're seeing a notice that person can go onto the website, and as long as you have a copy note or from your insurance, and there are a few other documents that they require, then you can register for your vehicle. But with regard to the one that Maxine mentioned, with the sticker, that because this one had a sticker that would normally go, I think, to the top of your windshield. Now, I don't know if that has actually worked. I don't know. They went about it the wrong way, because in terms of communication, I am accustomed that when my road tax was due, I would get a slip from the licensing authority saying your road tax is due X and Y date to go and pay the road tax. Since this government has gone the process of being automated, everything has gone to the wayside. They gave you the colored disc that you put on your license plate, which I like that one, because clearly from that you can look and see if a vehicle has not paid its insurance or road tax based on the color. So if it is yellow was 5 years ago, and you still have on the yellow sticker, now you know that something is wrong. But we seem to have been mixed up in the communication in terms of this particular one with the electronic tag that goes in. My understanding is that Maxine was probably skirting around the bush. It doesn't work. It does not work. do we have the infrastructure here to actually capture the vehicles? Because if it was working, the Attorney General would not be making a fool of himself all of the time asking about ticket, because you would be able to scan that and be able to get the vehicles that pass at certain locations. So it's not working. And I think if we got the ministry, this aspect of it, they need to come to the people of Barbados and give them a thorough explanation. What am I supposed to be doing now in terms of registration of my vehicles? Why has it moved from the insurance company doing the registration to this process where you can now freely go on to get the bits or whatever it is that you're supposed to be doing? They need to tidy up their act and get, do something in an orderly manner. That is what we are accustomed to.
How much sense it would have made really with the electronic registration because I think there's the cameras there in 6 rows. We have Waterford Bar. We have Highway 2A. I can't recall staying one or Highway 1. It means that because of our road network, strategically for every vehicle to pass through one of those, it meant that you would have to put them maybe 5 or 6 dozen in order to catch, because we have enough side roads, roads, everything that Barbadians would use to avoid passing through those. So I believe government in its wisdom, in its hindsight, really that it made no sense. And just Bernie telling the Barbadians to ask the question about this electronic registration to see if it is something that is totally valid or if the government intends to put some more money into this project.
Ensley, I think you wanted to
Yes.
share something in terms of.
Yes, ma'am. I want to digress a bit from the VR and look at and we spoke about the Ministry of Transport and the amount of money that is allocated to this ministry. If my memory serves me right, when this government came to office and they removed it was said that the tax on the fuel was supposed to go towards road repairs. Now, I asked in the government, how much money is collected from this fuel tax yearly? And how is this money spent? I think the public needs to know, the taxpayers of this country needs to know that. You were saying the fuel tax is to repair the roads. But then you're hearing, oh, there's a Chinese loan to repair the roads. There must be accountability. And the people of Barbados need to know this.
Thank you very much for that. I think we've been getting calls from the time the change was made to provide information. The unfortunate reality is that if things don't go into the consolidated fund, and you have what are called below the line accounts, we've heard of this in relation to education, well, to health, sorry, when you had a levy and so on. So that is an important question. And if I could also now talk a little bit about the public transport system, because we know that we have a very dense, I suppose, a high per capita youth ownership of motor cars. But a lot has been promised over the years in relation to public transportation. And I believe that as part of the government's negotiations with the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, that they have made a commitment in the same way that they have sought to divest the sugar industry, to divest the transport board. And so my question, there are a couple of things that are out there for which, so where are we in terms of the status of the transport board? We have heard of a mass transit authority, and studies were done and so on. So that's another question. Where are we with that? And if you go, you would notice, I think it was last year, sometime last year, open to correction because I didn't write down the name and the date, sorry. We had the Transport Authority regulations, being gazetted. I will go back and look and see when. And the question is, are these regulations are intended to control behaviors, you know, of drivers, of passengers of vehicles and a whole set of things. Now, if you have regulations which are supposed to govern behavior, where are the persons who will police the system? I think, you know, we used to have inspectors, you're young. We used to have inspectors and so on. The same concept that there are people out there who are supposed to do what we ask the police to do now, and have they appointed them. So we put these regulations in place to protect them. But if they are not applied, you know, through a proper monitoring system, then the kind of problems that we get will persist. So I really would want to know what is happening in relation to that Mass Transit Authority. I believe that somewhere the minister had promised that certain things will be in place last month. And the question is where are we with that? In addition to that, we remember the whole issue with our identification cards becoming used on buses and so on. Now, my position on that, and you gentlemen can tell me what you think. I have been able to use as recently as 2023. Oh, for last year, yes. Not last year, 24. My credit card on a train and on a bus in the UK. And if I didn't have that, I could have acquired what they call an Oyster card. So in essence, I don't have to utilize my ID card in any of those kinds of ways because, you know, and so my concern is that we sometimes complicate things unnecessarily so. And then we spend a lot of money on consultants who come with all kinds of fancy ideas rather than, as I say, keep things simple. I like to simplify, not complex. You know, and so this is one of the things, and I've heard some discussions recently with representatives of the private sector public transport, you know, the minibuses, etc., where they were talking about a cashless system. But have they presented a comprehensive package to these persons? And I would say the government, we have enough people who are into IT and so on, who can design properly systems that are not complex, but that are, you know, suited to the purpose rather than having to load all kinds of information on your ID card. I don't know, any thoughts on that? Andre?
Oh, you want me to go first?
Yeah, you go. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I thought, well, Pedro looked as though he was ready to jump in on it, but I can go.
Okay. I was looking for that.
No, you mentioned a few things because I think that we also need to remember that this ministry also involves Transport Board, and that there's a planned merger between Transport Board and the Transport Authority. Right, which for a lot of persons does not really make any sense. And again, this is the government now looking at ways in terms of doing aerobics with their payroll. You will have a number of persons who are full employees now returning with contract work, which is something that I don't agree with because it puts you at it changes your condition of work and your employment status more or less. But yes, we could, the ID card to use on the bus, that was just a gimmick to get people to rush to get a trading ID card. After many Barbadians were not doing it, and they don't think that it is not necessary at this stage. What we more need is a cashless system. Before we had a process of buying tokens, there's nothing to say that you cannot use your a card which is transferable not just for the transport board, but amongst the PSVs as well. If that's the direction in which you're heading in. And you go to the terminal and you top up your card, or you top up your card online, we need to get to that stage in Barbados. And Maxine is correct. There are a number of young people in Barbados who will be glad to work out with framework in terms of getting that done. Because they think that we depend too much on cash in our society, and we need to start using digital wallets. You have a phone, so you don't need no card. Everybody has a phone, and that is what most people use nowadays. You tap the phone. Well, not here in Barbados, but when you go to the US or to London, you tap your phone, and that is what you pay for everything. So that we should be able to do that, tap our phones when you get into a bus and pay. And at that note too, you should be able to look at the phone to see when the Martin Bay bus will reach your its destination, so you will know when to go out for your bus.
Pedro?
Yeah, I think the transport authority, which is responsible for the regulation of all public transport. Its primary function is to plan, monitor, and regulate the public transport system in Barbados. So it covers the vendors, the BMs, the taxis, transport board. I think even regular vehicles, it has control over those. I think the problem with our transport system though is, as was said earlier, there's no persons to monitor the system. Because the transport authority has the power to issue, cancel, suspend license of drivers and conductors of automobile. They also have the power to issue, suspend, or revoke permits in respect of public service vehicles, the taxis, and so on. So it has a lot of power, but whether it has the staff to do it, or whether the traveling public respect the staff. Because I remember years ago, I think we still have them, a few of those persons that licensing authority, they wear, I think, a beige shirt and brown pants. They will stop many buses, the cars, and so on sometimes. I guess if they're in breach of laws and so on. But how many of those we have? In terms of the transport board and this mass transit authority, the transport board, again this year, is getting a transfer of $12 million. So I don't think there's any intention to merge the transport board in any hurry. The question therefore is the transport board serving its purpose? We saw government bringing in a number of electric buses to top up the existing buses, but we are seeing a reduction in the fleet. Where, therefore, are the electric buses? Where are the diesel-powered buses that were still running? We have a case where when you pass the depots, you see a number of these electric buses out of service. Maybe we did not choose the correct bus suited for Barbados. Remember when the buses first came, it was an issue of these buses traveling long distances in the country. Some of them could not pull the hills and so on. The terrain, the rough roads. I remember the first week that those electric buses came out, persons were complaining about the noise because every part of the bus was shaking and the buses went through the potholes and so on. So I think the government has to come to the public and say what is the plan for the transport board. Because in recent years, we've also seen the program, which is the transportation of augmentation project, being instituted as well, where a number of private concessionaires and so on have been purchasing coaches and joining the public transport system. Now, we talk about cashless system, we talk about all sorts of things, but are these people going to be able to go the cashless route when the complaint is that governments don't pay? So are you going to allow people to ride on your bus, your coach, for 3 and 4 weeks without getting the funds from the government. That is something that we have to look at. We also have to look at the issue of routes and so on. If bus fare, for example, is $3.50, no matter the distance, why would I want, I mean, you have no control, but why would I want to run BFP or San Francisco with my coach when my brother, my cousin running Bush Hall, getting back to the terminal in 10 minutes, moving more people at the same 350 and so on. So the whole fare structure and those things, I believe need addressing. I want to raise this concern for the people of St. Lucie in particular, because the people of St. Lucie, in order to get to Bridgetown, has to pay $7. They have to take a bus to Spokesperson and then walk from Spokesperson to Bridgetown. I believe that is unfair and needs to be addressed immediately. Because I think Checker Hall, for example, is the same distance probably as DLP, St. Lawrence Castle. We take one bus from Bridgetown to DLP, one from St. Lawrence Castle to Bridgetown. I think in addition to the water problem, now you're compounding it with transportation problems in St. Lucie. So my call tonight would be for the Ministry of Transport and Works to look at the transportation system, particularly in St. Lucie, and then we can look at the whole fare structure. I heard recently,
Transfer system, maybe?
maybe a transfer system. I heard recently that there's going to be this, maybe it's a rumor or gimmick where you have free transportation from the 1st of May. Now, if that is true, if that is, you know, you already have free, the trader free, you have policemen going on the bus for free, and people having issues in getting payment for these. So I believe that the transport really needs to have maybe proper management, maybe some audit needs to be done on the transport board. As I said earlier, we need to look at the number of buses, whether I was in the feast on the night, for example, and I saw 3 electric buses pass where I was not a passenger. So again, we have to look at the hours and load down time, scheduling. I was in the point recently, and some people in the point was asking why the people in the point cannot get buses passing through the point. The buses pass on the outskirts. So if you have groceries, you have to walk maybe 3 kilometers with the groceries. If you have to go to work at certain times, you have to take taxi to get to work. So I think that we need to really look at the transportation system so that it's fair for everybody in the country.
Thanks,
Right.
Andrew.
Can you just jump on to something that you mentioned with regard to the persons in St. Lucie? I remember that prior to COVID, and I think there's still a bulletin board in by the Glee, where they were talking about this pub and sports system, which was supposed to start. So I wanted that date of COVID, because
Probably.
you have not heard anything more about it. Where you were supposed to get, you were able to do the transfer. And these are the things that you need to be doing in the transportation system now. So I don't know if it died of COVID, but that's something that they should answer.
Thanks a lot. I want though, well, to kind of pull together some of that, because we started to talk about the future, the transport board and what is the plan. And it gave me an opportunity, as you were speaking, to go and look at some of that. Pulled. I read something from the Barbados' medium-term fiscal framework 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028. And that page 30 and 31, it says government has resumed the SOE reform program, SOE being state-owned enterprises, which was interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic and has identified several entities for reform. Detailed plans have been drafted for the restructuring of the Transport Board and the National Housing Corporation and for the amalgamation of the operations of rural assets. Now, as I read that, I also looked at a note that I took from an article in the Barbados Advocate of Monday, the 31st of May, 2021. And this is what it said then, because I'm now talking about the, whether the Transport Board. So this sounds like the Transport Board is more slow boat than a runaway bus. transition from transport board, and, to the mass transit authority push. That's what it said, mass transit authority push, and this is an article, just to repeat myself, of the 31st of May 2021. The Barbados Advocate, and I read from that. Government is moving ahead with the establishment of a Barbados Mass Transit Authority. And this new initiative, which is set to improve the transportation sector, will be a reality within the next year, 2022. Next year, best month of the year, May. Minister of Transport, Works and Water Resources, as it was then, Ian Goodenough announced recently. He was at the time addressing the Barbados Labour Party inaugural town hall political match rally. And he said this: the Barbados Mass Transit Authority will, along with employees of the Transport Board and former employees and persons who are interested, ordinary Barbadians, who are interested in ownership in the mass transit sector, to have a role in the sector. The government will retreat, but will become a regulator, he stated. And he went on to say, name another country in the Caribbean, indeed the world, that has taken such a bold move to the enfranchisement of workers in the transport sector and the most free cash flowing business in the world. Well, he is no longer Minister of Transport Works and Water Resources. He probably took it on one of his tours, attending one of the promotional exercises in tourism to Norway. But really and truly, in all seriousness, this is something that has been promised for a long time. We know that government, I suspect, in terms of it, terms and conditions that it has agreed to with the International Monetary Fund, as I said before, will have to deal with this. And he also said something here, and I think I should read this too, because he's talking about this same transition or whatever. So my question is, where has this gone? Because they say no transition can happen without engaging the unions first, and we are fortunate to have strong labor representation guiding us. Okay? So I really think that, this was promised in 2022. We are now in the end of the first quarter of 2020. Not 2022, sorry, the promise have been completed in 2020. But so that is something that I really wonder what has happened, because they've made this bold promise. But now there's another article here now. Government vows unified mass transit authority by March. So the first case was Minister Goodenough. Now we have the Deputy Prime Minister. And in an article of the 25th of February this year, and the article is in Barbados Today. It's titled Government Vows Unified Mass Transit Authority by March. Maybe March. It didn't say what year. That's the say next year. You say next year. But the article said, then here goes. The government is in the final stages of planning a significant overhaul of the island's public transport system, merging the state bus company with the transport regulator into a single mass transit authority. So the transport board will disappear according to this, as well as the regulatory body, the transport authority. The Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Transport and Works and Roger confirmed in Parliament on Monday. Combining the transport board and transport authority would streamline operations and enhance service reliability. So this is it. The transition process is well on the way. Now, having said to me 4 years ago that you do this, and I will not hold my breath. Then there's something saying that you have to amend regulation, revising the regulations, and drafting new legislation. So you're promising this week by March, but you're saying in February you have all this legislation to draft and all of these things. So that's just another pie in the sky. So the Runaway bus will turn into road. So let me pause there because I'm hearing myself quite a bit. Andre, is there anything that you want to flag in relation to this ministry?
Well, in terms of what you discussed, I'm thinking that the government took a wrong step in terms of merging the transport board with the transport authority. As I say, what they could have done, the role of the transport authority, which was a regulatory role, was done before by the ministry. Gone back there into the ministry, because merging the transport authority with the transport board is not very a mass transit unit comes with buses,
And all the parents must be involved.
and all the players must be involved. So I don't know if by merging that you mean that you're bringing all of the PSVs on board, or you're bringing them, you're forcing them, they're coming willingly, or because even with the PAC program, which the government is still relying heavily on to for transportation in Barbados, because I don't know if many of you know that those electric buses only run morning, and then they come back on in the evening. Then during the day is the PAC program,
Okay.
which operates especially the long bus routes like Martins Bay and Bathsheba and those areas. Program meaning the minivans and so forth. So government is not at a stage where they can do a mass transit program without the complete buy-in of the PSVs. And a lot of persons dropped out of the PAC program because they were not being paid for time by the government. And for all the talk that the minister is making, you still have Barbadians, and this is what we have not come to and we need to come to, in the bus terminal for 2 hours, sometimes waiting for a bus. So that if you go into the bus terminal after 8 o'clock in the morning, or say 9 o'clock, sometimes you don't get another bus until 12 o'clock. And then at night, if the 6 o'clock bus miss you, you may not get another bus till 6:30, 8:30, and then after 8:30, the next bus is 11 o'clock. We need to work better in that situation, and you're dependent on the PSVs that operate in the program to transport you during the day, because the electric buses are off the road recharging. They come back in the evening for the schools and then to run the rest of the program.
Actually, before anybody else, as I listened to you, I was just consulting my notes. And the way I wrote them, I had all this information at the back. And as I listened to you, we were talking about the former minister, the Nigerian, and then I came forward, but let me go back a little further back. With the minister who launched the transport augmentation program. And this, I'm looking at an article. Where did this come from? I like to quote my sources, saying, this was, I think, an article back then, but remember that he would have been around 2019 or something, right? Minister Godineja also reported that the Barbados, their prices slash losses at the transport board from 21.2 in 2019, but I found this quote attributed to Minister to be quite interesting when he launched the transport augmentation program to integrate private sector operators that will, in his words, help us as a country to provide a reliable public transport system. And he went on to say, we opened up the terminals to all the operators in the transport sector and gave them an opportunity as small business people to access loans to fund that sector. But I also know some losses to mention that they payments, etc. And in trying to assist that man, I realized that contributed significantly to his flood. But I love this quote, and I'm going to share it, and then we can probably look at something else related. And this was his word. He said, look at what the Barbados Labour Party has done in public transport. And I say to you that when we are finished with public transport, the sector will never be the same again. And I will follow you. Prior to the and she's moved on. It looks like the words of the former minister did came true. But I also want to look at the issue of, we were talking about cashless system, and again, this is something that's, to my mind, a little bit shrouded in some mystery. And the question I will put on the table, if and when that happens, will government be controlling those resources, the money, the management of that? Or is it gonna be given to private concessionaire? And under what terms and conditions? I would hazard a guess from all that I've seen and heard, that it will be a private concessionaire. And then become some, so, I mean, that in itself is not problematic, but based on how we see contracts being awarded in this ministry and elsewhere, and the failure to deliver, it doesn't make me feel very confident. I'll pause. Anything you want to share, Ensley, or?
For me personally, I would like some explanation, some clarity to this cashless system, because cashless system would work in other jurisdictions because you have efficiency in the transport sector. In Barbados, there's no efficiency. A lot of people leave home, let's say, for example, to catch a plane, what's in the morning. For some reason, suppose you change bikes. When you don't have your carrier to use on it. Your next bus coming is 7 or 8. If you're in New York or one of your jurisdictions, you can go back, get your carrier in another 10 to 15 minutes, another bus is here. So I'm saying that the cashless system sounds pretty because looking at security and so on, but you also have to take into consideration that there will be cases or instances where people might not have whatever card or instrument is to be used. And it comes back to the whole thing again with payment. We have a lot of persons in Barbados. We have a population, very aged population again. Are these people going to be assisted with how to use this system? We go abroad and we see things happen, and I think we come back to Barbados and try to use the system, lock, stock, and burn. And then we run into difficulties, and we have then to pull back. And this is going to be another case of the government pulling back. I am not sure that we are ready for a fully cashless system. I believe that we need to have some transition into this. It is similar to the ID cards and so on, where you just want to rush things and then the systems don't work and you have to pull back. So if you're going cashless, I believe that we need to do an experiment. The school system, the school children who are taking buses for free and so on. Do we have the capacity to accommodate those students who be using this system along with the private citizens and so on? I think it is something that needs a lot more discussion, a lot more fleshing out, rather than just to say because you want to cut back on crime or you want to look at the security of the drivers and conductors and so on. But I heard people recently speaking about the case where the PSBs decided that they're going to stop at 6 o'clock. That was the problem. So when you're looking at the issue of crime and so on, and people trying to be safe and finish it early, you put a number of users at risk because those same passengers know would have to catch other buses, public bus, what more in some cases, and what the additional distance is in the dark and so on. So you have to create the environment where all of these things would work. You say to the government, have some transition into this program, rather than just effective, whatever day we're going to catch.
Okay, thank you for that. I want to deal with some what I would call bread and butter things now. Because as I look at the strategic goals as set out in the information and the estimates, the first one says to provide sound planning, policy advice, and technical services in the areas of transport, road works, mechanical, electrical service, and drainage maintenance. Now they're talking about policy and plan. I want to talk about operational issues now. And when I leave here, I will drive most likely on the Spring Garden. The last time I counted, there were 25 lights out and dark. And I remember one night in another life, a different period in my life, let me put that, I might have stopped and asked the lady who I saw walking down the road in the dark, you should need it right now, but you can't do that now. And I just felt sorry, because here's this woman probably going home from work tired and battling with a dangerous, because it's dark, dangerous from the point of view of crime, the potential of being robbed and so on. And then there's a possibility of an accident because the road is dark and so on. And that has been like that for months, because I've been checking it, I've reported it. And I will say here now, I even mentioned it to the minister when we were addressing and we were participating in an event for Women's Day at university. And I told her, I hope you can speak to somebody about this, because these lights have been out, and that event was International Women's Day, March 8th. So that's about today is the 8th of April, a month ago. So, and it was months before that I saw that. So that is one kind of issue. The other thing, of course, and I think you might have touched on it, but it is something that needs reiterated because we are approaching the hurricane season. I grew up, as I said, on Black Rock Main Road, and I saw how those roads were maintained, whether it was trees and so on, overgrowing, growing over utility lines, and they were trimmed routinely in advance of the hurricane season. The gutters were cleaned, the drains were maintained and so on. And I'm my age myself, but when I was a girl, and a certain gentleman called Ramon's mom would have been my contemporary, so he can ask because she could testify to this. They didn't have trucks. There was an old man with a donkey cart, to the point where I saw him go from able to disabled, and he continued. He would lean on the thing, but you can guarantee that when the guys cut the grass and the soil and so on removed from the thing, it was removed immediately. I mean, and here you have the whole question of planning and management of these things. I mean, we've talked about it, but right now we're not seeing even that. Utility wires, people have been complaining. I think with the increased use of cell phones and so on, landlines. I presume those wires that we see wrapped up and so on are not electric. But so they're basic, I call it housekeeping things that we need to ask people to do, because it's not only on site, it is potentially dangerous. I remember driving through an avenue by one of my sisters, and the wires were literally touching the vehicle because they had come down and nobody seemed to, and so these are the kind of concerns that I have. So when I look at the whole issue of, and so that's the first strategic goal in terms of planning and policy and advice. And then it comes down towards the end. One of the last goals is to provide effective flood alleviation and mitigation solutions across borders. And before we start getting sophisticated, I think what we have to do is deal with, as I said, those basic issues that essentially require the basic kinds of maintenance to be done. And it's not difficult. It is something that can be easily done. It lends itself to maybe private contractors doing it, small operators, but it also is about planning and scheduling. And that is straightforward, but I think there are simple things like that which make for a better.
Just a way, because I think that the street lights, because I've heard people mention to me that in their area, a number of streetlights which were in place before, the seem as though the government is strategically removing some of these streetlights. But you know that the government actually pays light and power for each one of these streetlights. So I do not know if it is deliberate and part of the cost reduction program in terms of removing some streetlights, because I've heard people say that they call their MPs about these lights, and they were told that the lights are no longer under the program. So that but it's a very dangerous thing to be doing at this time, not replacing streetlights, especially with the crime situation in Barbados. And also, you need proper streetlights on the roads, and it is very dangerous. And especially when you have people walking on the side of the road and you can't see them properly, can't see certain vehicles, you can't see certain junctions properly as well. So if that is part of the cost reduction measure, that is definitely a no. Because we had a program which I think is still being done to replace all of the streetlights with the lights, which would reduce the overall costs.
But I think there's a $2.5 million budget allocated to the lighting program. And that program, I believe, is shared with the government electrical department. Right? I know the ministry has vehicles that I see with the changes of lights, and so I think the government electrical will probably do more installation of the lights. But if we're talking about security in Barbados and we're talking about safety on our roads and so on, I don't know how we can be reducing the number of street lights. And you're also encouraging people not to use the white lights on their cars. It means therefore that the streets have to be lit well enough. The road users can use it. The issue of, as you said, there are some junctions that you don't see at night because of poor lighting. See, recently the ministry started to put down the categories in the road. Doing the pave now, they put down the categories and so on, which is good. But again, the material used to put down these categories again is not sturdy. So after a while, you see the categories drifting to the side of the road, so on.
Yeah, start to walk.
Yeah, not the way. So maybe again, some people that like wasting money. So if you're going to do things, I believe you have to do them properly, and maybe you have to take time, maybe the person in the road and stick the categories or something so they will not move. Because you don't want to drive over the categories and hear the all the time as well. So as we try to become efficient and so on, these are things that we have to look at. But I believe that we should be increasing the street lights as opposed to reducing the street lights. And maybe the whole fuel tax and so on can assist in putting street lights on our streets. Why haven't we gone to solar lights? Maybe the solar lights are not as bright. I am not sure, but solar lights they're going to get, but they burn, and it doesn't mean we have to put them closer. These people will know that there is light on the road, so you move to suit the darkness and failures. So again, when we talk about the drainage and lighting, people walking on the road, I think that we have to move towards making the roads more friendly for pedestrians. Too many of our roads, pedestrians have to be either in the gutter or between two walls, and literally stop onto a cut rock because of passments. These are things that I believe the Ministry of Transport and Works need to look at. I live in the country. There are many dark areas as you traverse from Bridgetown to St. Felix and UC, even on the highway to A. You know, it's a stretch coming up to Black Bess, a black road at fall, not a light. Not even a cafe to guide you. And they have trees on both sides. These are concerns that I believe the ministry needs to look at, because if you're looking at safety and trying to reduce fatalities and so on, all these issues we need to address. And we're spending millions of dollars at the Ministry of Transport and Works. The taxpayers of Barbados would want to see what their taxes are going towards.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
One of the things I think, Maxine, in relation to the strategic goal that you were to provide effective plan. I think the reinstitution, I would say, of the airport would be useful in that regard. I think that was at the time we're working to inform on the state of roads in particular areas across the island. A person could call into a depot and say, well, there's a pothole on this particular road. And then what would happen? workmen would move in and have that whole fixed. If it was then a case where the road became too much for the depot, then they would be responsible for informing the ministry to move in and have that done. But the functions of the depot were really to ensure that local communities were looked after, and that is something that should be back.
But I think that's still the case, but whether the depots are given the material for the workers to use would be the question. Because you still have 6 stores depot, you have one somewhere down in those states, and you know David might be able to particular location. So you still have Chance Hall, I think you still have one somewhere in the Christchurch area. So they still depots. But when you call depots, no material.
I want to raise something which is a personal worry for me, and I'm not sure how it fits into you talk about the roads and managing them and safety and all of this. But as I drive across Barbados, I am almost terrified sometimes when I stop my car by certain walls that are crumbling, about to collapse. And if I remember correctly, years ago, a child, might have been a boy, lost his life when a wall collapsed in Barbie's Hill. And as I notice it all the time, whether you're going across from Station Hill, coming towards the traffic lights, going towards away from the school, come there and down. If you're coming across, I mean, there's so many areas. If I come, I'm trying to remember the names of these roads, but every time I stop by a property where there's a wall and you see major cracks, it's leaning and all of these things. These things can be dislocated by rain, by earth tremors, by simply, the thing, vibrations. Because sometimes people pass in my neighborhood and the vibrations from the noise of the music systems and so on, you feel them vibrating in places. And to me, I wonder who monitors these and what would happen.
It falls
down to the street. And the question is, do they do anything about it? Because, and as I said, I've watched some of them deteriorate over years, and I just literally hold my breath sometimes when I pass there because it is scary. I mean, maybe
when I go down past the stadium, the Barbados Number Company, going down to the junction I keep my eyes on the mahogany trees. Those two are falling.
but you see, and you've raised an interesting thing because mahogany, if branches and so on are cut and if the water, if it can penetrate, I've seen many mahogany trees fall during bad weather. But it is all about monitoring and adjusting and making certain requirements and putting certain standards in place because to lose one life is bad enough. I want to go back now having read that because every time I see it I always say, when can I speak to this? But we've talked about the plans under the as stated under the government's medium-term fiscal framework 2025, 26, 2027, 28, which includes plans to restructure the transport board and I'm sure outside of the transport board, you also see things happen at the MTW itself because we know that MTW was very much into road construction. The ministry has, from what I'm told, lots of equipment lying around, not functioning, sometimes only requiring small, relatively inexpensive parts, etc. Now, my question is, with all that is happening and with your plans for, I mean, we have a road program which runs from, there's a program called, I think I mentioned it, about car roads. What is the plan if because you're looking to privatize a lot of these things or put into retain the services of private contractors, service providers. What is the plan to, with that equipment? Is this something that some of the very workers who might have retired or will be retired under some of these programs, that equipment, if it is, if it is properly, repaired or whatever, or if they don't require ridiculously expensive repairs, be able to some of these people to do some of this work? Because I don't understand why it would sit there. These are costs being incurred. And if you're talking about, as I said, I'm trying to find the different programs that they had in terms of their programs that I pulled down from the ministry. So I really think that is okay. Here it is. There's something called the Community Access Road Transformation Project, CART. So it's a CART road, as I said, the Community Access Road Transformation CART project was launched in 2023 to transform urban or CART roads into conventional surface roads using milling material from the airport's runway. Now, I'm not an engineer. That's not my forte, but the question is, how effective is this? I hope they're not using it says here, CART roads will be transformed into conventional surface roads using the milling stuff, not my words. This is from the government's website. From the airport's runway, penetrated with asphalt, emulsion, roll, and compacted, and then sand seal. Now, the question is, has this started? Who is doing it? What is the projected life of these roads, etc. And if this is the case, because if it's a good solution, is it something that I heard the word enfranchisement in relation to the transport board. So can we have some kind of enfranchisement in relation to construction if you're not using the officers, the staff at NTW who traditionally did roads? Can they be empowered to do something?
Are these CART road,
Well,
Plantation Road,
well, I
Tenantry Road, that need developing?
I can only
Because
go ahead, sorry.
because
In some way, you need to be careful with.
yeah, because I know, for example, there's a road in my basin that was recently cordoned off because farmers will complain about predator and so on.
Mhm.
Now, if you are going to use this particular project, I thought that you would be in community where similar agricultural pursuits and so on will be undertaken. No, because the Pineville Road was an access, a shortcut for a lot of vehicles, government vehicles, sanitation, trucks, everything, block it off because of this predator. So if you're using this fancy term now for this CART project, but you're going into similar areas where people use these CART roads in terms of farming, shortcuts and so on, you put down this stuff and then you restrict the use of these roads to people who will not be going in.
But why would you do that? Because sometimes a lot of these projects just come with fancy names, but then it's just the opportunity to find a job for somebody, to give someone a job. Because why are you going to do it on a CART road that is not utilized when you have a number of tenantry roads in rural communities
And development.
Right, because up to this week, I saw Alvin talking posts for someone in St. Lucie on a road which is more or less a mud trap. Right, you have a lot of those that would need paving and can do with the same the same material and put some barbed wire to make roads. But why are you going to do a CART road that nobody is utilizing? A CART road that more or less have to go through a cane field with this crime situation.
No lights.
There, no lights or anything of that sort. But so a lot of these projects are just fancy names and opportunities to put money in the hands of certain people, and you know that money will circulate and get another area.
As what I'm hearing then is that suggestions on these, at least the method of fixing what would be tenantry rules.
Mhm.
As opposed to car. But you see, the website speaks to scores of car roads in urban and rural districts across Barbados to be created. As it says here, the improved road service would allow residents to have better access. So,
And in most cases, if there are homes along a car road, it's probably just the first few meters. But then the car road goes through acres of paved road. Why you need to pave all of that?
Mhm.
That belongs to plantation, that the
but
plantation.
I guess they- yeah, hopefully the proper criteria for selecting these things, because we only get them.
I don't want to be mischievous to that way to tell the criteria for this national one. They're not after the four.
Look at the case of using it. Because the probably airport, you see tons and tons of material just be stuck. So put it, in some of these areas. But again, you have to do it properly because then you have the climate change and you have the rain and you have vehicles shifting this material, drainage issues and so on.
Yes, it's a good thing to use the material, but I know, for instance, Kendall and St. John. You just have the main road, which was built by the DLP administration, but then there are other houses that stretch for a good distance into the community, which is not a proper road. Those are the areas that should benefit from that, not a cat road that would, cat roads connect communities. Cat roads don't lead to houses. They connect communities and they connect playing fields. Right, but yes, it's a good idea that you milled the airport runway to reuse recycle the material, but where you're putting it, it would be more impactful to deal with a number of the tenantry roads. You also have College Savannah in St. John, which face similar issues as well. So there are a number of areas that could have benefited from it, even in some rural urban areas as well that could benefit from that.
Now, the question I would have in relation to that, and taking into consideration the suggestions that you're making, that the technique and the recycling of the materials from the runway are sensible. But the question is, where do you, and what should be prioritized? Where do you go with this? And also that you follow what is described as a reasonable sounding way of doing it. Because if you have shortcuts, somebody may decide, you have a contract, you put it, just roll it over, and it essentially, so I think it comes with a caveat that this can transform tenantry roads, and it should be done where, in fact, there's a prioritizing of the ones most in need of resurfacing. So that's it. Well, I think we're coming towards the last 12 or so minutes of the program. So what I'm going to ask you is to share any concerns, any suggestions, any thoughts that you have as we look at the Ministry of Transport and Work. Andre?
Yeah, what I would like to get at, which we didn't really touch today, is traffic congestion. And also the coordination and planning of the mill and pave program and the construction. Sometime last week, which coincided with the beginning of the new financial year, I'm leaving from St. John. I got traffic from Grove all the way down, because we had to go through Jack in the Box Gully. And every single road that we touched, there was a road on the construction or moving heavy machinery in place to construct these roads. So you went across Jack in the Box Gully, when you got to the area by like Savon, they're doing that road as well. So obviously, if you plan construction of roads all in the same area, it means that all of the detour roads are going to be blocked up. So, and without the construction, I find that the traffic situation in Barbados has become unmanageable and unbearable, and the government needs to do something about it. So one of the sure things to do, because of the poor public transport system, everybody feel the need to get a vehicle. So therefore you have that issue. but we need to put measures in place to deal with the traffic congestion. I found that during COVID, for the period of time where persons were allowed to work from home, that you had less traffic on the road at certain times. So can we go back to that? Because we cannot have a productive workforce if persons come to work inhaling the smoke for 2 hours, then to get to work so that that's tired and frustrated from the traffic, having to spend 2 hours. Because if you want to get to Bridgetown for 8 o'clock, you better leave home at 6:30. Otherwise, you cannot get down there for 8 o'clock.
It's a problem, in fact, as you were talking about congestion, because you indicated there are a couple of things. One, I've been seeing a number of vehicles on the road that are vehicles that, are, yeah, new or different, a lot of hybrid, etc. And I'm not sure it's a simple replacement of vehicles, but I just think that the absolute number of vehicles probably increased. And so with the additional congestion coming from the road works, and that is part of that is temporary, but it's a continuing problem. And I believe that in the same way that COVID forced people to work remotely, we have talked about flexible flexi time, flexible hours for decades. And I think that is something that is important as well. And an enhanced reliable public transport system can make a difference. Because at the end of the day, I think part of it, I'm not going to go and stand up waiting for a bus if I don't know when it's going to come. But where a lot of people live in relation to the key areas that they want to go to, if you have a reliable system, we will use it. We leave and go overseas and use public transportation. The bus comes within 2 or 3 minutes of the schedule, and if it is going to be late, you're notified that it's going to be late. So I think with all of these things, these are some of the things that we need to really look at and try to improve. And that's important.
Right, yeah. I think also added on to sport and work. At the point in time, water resources was attached to that ministry.
Yeah.
And under the Barclays Labour Party's 2018 manifesto, at page 50, under the rubric of urban regrading, the manifesto said to review and regularize the substandard living conditions of residents of Lake Village in Bellevue in respect to water, sanitation. And say that the persons in Lake Village and the Bell still have and still live in the same substandard conditions as they were back then, according to this report. But we have a situation where the government is the stroke of a pen, as it were, changed the Zone 1 water table in that Bell area to Zone 8. And hence we see the construction of a new geriatric hospital. When we see what is happening in the Jefferson area and so on, we can now maybe hazard the guess as to why the haste in that frequent change from the Zone 1, from the Zone 1 to Zone 8. Does it mean that there is no longer a water table? Does it mean that it doesn't have the seriousness that was attached to it before? And if the geriatric hospital, when constructed, there is sewage that will be coming from that facility. What mechanism is in place to capture, treat, what have you, of that sewage as it relates to the integrity of the said water table being built on. And if it is good for the geriatric hospital, will it be good for Lakeridge Village and the Bell to be able to have waterborne toilets and access to running water? There are persons in Lakeridge Village and the Bell or Ensley McClean who have to run like 200 and 300 feet of conduit from their homes to a standpipe. There are persons living without waterborne toilet facilities. In modern urban Barbados in 2025, and a government that came to power cares, and who their intention was to eradicate public toilet. And in 2025, we have persons living in those same standard conditions. It cannot be fair to these people. If the geriatric hospital is going to be built, then government needs to come and tell those poor people what is their plan. They will be able to connect what sewer system is being built to capture and to treat the effluent from the geriatric hospital. In another instance, I want to say that roads infrastructure is the responsibility of any government, and that roads should not be used or held as an election carrot over an electorate to votes. It's your responsibility as the government to ensure that roads are repaired, roads are built. And this government has used a lot of dubious language, you would say. When they at page 48 of their manifesto on the roads, local roads are in need of repair and rebuilding. We will consider the feasibility constructing a redesigned system of flyovers at heavily trafficked roundabouts. We will construct a new bypass highway from Brampton to the airport to St. Thomas. Sweet sounding language, but then what is it? Empty, and nothing happens. So I think that when we look at it, it has been a failed government based on the policies, rich in talk, but very poor in action.
Pedro?
Well, as the spokesperson for transport and works, I believe that I should give the public of Barbados a general view of what the vision of the Democratic Party will be. Vision that I want for the Ministry of Transport and Works and the Democratic Party government. And certainly, they would have spoken of the strategic plan and so on of the ministry. But I would believe that under a Democratic Party government, we would want to ensure that the Ministry of Transport and Works is seen as the provider of policies aimed at providing an effective and efficient transportation system for Barbadians. To this end, I would want to recommend that we have a complete review of the existing Transport Authority and Transport Board. And this review should include a review of the routes, of the schedules, of the fare structure, and of the vehicles used in the transportation sector. I believe that a new Democratic Party government would want to also look at the equipment owned, leased, or rented by the Ministry of Public Works and Transport. Earlier in the program, you would have heard of equipment and a concern with equipment, and if you pass with indeed up, see lots of equipment. And you see new looking equipment. The equipment looks new, the equipment is new, but a lot of it is not working. Because of, and I have heard contractors, people who work for the ministry, saying that some of the equipment that the ministry needs using, $35. And you would rather let that equipment stay in the yard and pay some private contractor $50,000 or $60,000 to do the job. So I believe that we would have to look at the issue of the equipment owned rented lease with the ministry, with a view of giving timely and efficient service to the people in terms of rehabilitation and upgrades. It's my belief that the Ministry of Transport and Work should also own specialized equipment and even a quarry. I believe that some of the road construction should be done by the Ministry of Public Works and Transport. Leave the heavier stuff of the highways and so on maybe for the larger contractors. But where we are going into communities, territories, and so on, I think that we can engage the services of some of the smaller contractors and the persons who live in some of those areas as well. I believe that we also mentioned the depots. We would want to give the depots our attention as well. I believe high priority, we look at the materials used in road construction and so on. I believe that we should also be given high priority to the materials used in road construction, and we want to look at the finishes. And so an attempt will be made to have roads constructed with sidewalks and provisions for runoff and drainage. Priority would also be given to the construction of new roads where rehabilitation appears to be just a short term or even more expensive over the we spoke of traffic management and congestion area. That is something that would engage the attention of the new Democratic Labour Party administration. It was, for example, as you leave probably Brighton on evenings going to 6 Roads, it is a traffic jam. On mornings, anytime around 8 and leave Beulah Corner coming to 6 Roads, similar problem. So I believe that the new Democratic Party administration will look into a traffic management, comprehensive traffic management program, not only for 6 Roads, but we also would look where we have congestion, will be triangle, for example. I think that was where the only Democratic Party at the test. We would want to review that as well. Of course, we would try to make roads in Barbados safer for the users, whether we're driving, riding, or walking, because we would try our best efforts to reduce reckless driving. We want to improve lighting, for example, so as to reduce the number of road fatalities. So the Democratic Labour Party, ladies and gentlemen, Barbadians at home and in the diaspora, has a plan for the Ministry of Public Works and Transport, has a plan for the wider transportation sector, the lighting of the country, and so on. And we are hoping that certainly all programs as we prepare our manifesto and so on into the next election.
Well, thank you very much. And let me say thank you to Senator Andre Worrell, Mr. Ensley Grainger, and Mr. Pedro Shepherd. This has been Honest Voices for the People. And Maxine McClean saying it's been a pleasure being with you again this evening. Thank you, and looking forward to your continued support of our program. Ladies and gentlemen, I trust that you will join us for our celebration of service where we will celebrate the 70th anniversary of the forming of the Democratic Labour Party, and I look forward to seeing you there. And again, thank you very much for joining us. I believe that my panel will agree that we have had a good evening, and I ask that you continue to follow and share so that people can hear the issues that we put on the table. Again, thank you very much. Have a great evening.